you can't be so heads down that you're only working on the stuff that hits your plate. That is how you get kind of pigeonholed into this, non-strategic role. And that's the people will think of you as just a doer. We are doers, and that's
Sure.
important. It's important to get stuff done. But looking outward and figuring out what's next, what should I be focusing on is so critical. And I think, mentorship and the coaching was so pivotal, but networking is really critical, and benchmarking along with the networking.
How can GCs and legal ops leaders work better together? How do you cultivate a high performance culture across your legal team? And what makes for a thriving community of legal ops professionals? Today, we are lucky to be joined on the abstract by Steph Corey, co-founder of Link, the Legal Innovators Network, which was recently acquired. I think last week is when we're going to be, we're releasing this the week after the acquisition is announced, recently acquired by the L Suite, another community that's very close to my heart. I spent quite a bit of time working with Kieran and Greg back when it was called Tech GC before the rebrand. Link is a community of more than 500 in-house legal ops professionals. They exchange insights, talk about pain points that they have, share resources and best practices. Steph is also the CEO and co-founder of UpLevel Ops, which is a consultancy that helps legal departments think about sustainable success and building for the future. So she's got tons of insights across community building, how to build a great legal department, how legal ops professionals can work well together, that we're going to be talking about today. Before starting Link and UpLevel Ops, Steph was the chief of staff to the general counsel and head of legal operations at companies like Flex, VMware, and HP, Hewlett Packard. She was also the co-founder of CLOC, or a co-founder of CLOC, which I think many of you know is a huge organization for information sharing and connecting among legal ops professionals. And we're going to start our conversation here. Before becoming a legal ops leader, she spent a few years working in finance and accounting. So, Steph, thanks so much for joining us today for this episode of The Abstract.
Oh, thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate you having me.
Okay, so I previewed my first question. You started your career as a finance analyst. What prompted the switch for you into legal ops? I think, like a lot of people, your sort of path in wasn't totally preordained. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's so funny because I was like, "Wow, you're saying all these, whatever." You're reading my bio, and I'm like, "That sounds so cool." And then you're like, "She came from finance and accounting." I'm like, "Oh, that maybe isn't as cool." But oh no, I'm boring.
No,
Um,
accountants are cool
but
too.
said no one ever. No, I think it's funny. I had an affinity for, the numbers when I was in school, and I really loved econ and just that. And so I figured that would be my career path. And then when I actually got into it, like so many things, the practicality of working in that environment wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be. I know that's really shocking. And it was kind of like, working in that space in the 90s, which, even though I'm dating myself, but it was a harder environment actually for women to be in too.
Hmm.
And so, it was a little cutthroat, and I was a little naive, I think. And I think it just wasn't the right environment for me. And I really did enjoy my time in mortgage banking, to make myself sound super, super exciting, right? I really did actually like that work. And I had a really fun time working at the company I was at then. But HP was looking for this legal operations manager, and I had no idea what that was. I had no idea what the role of the legal department was in a corporation. I had no idea what a general counsel did. And I was this like peppy early 20 something year old, and I had the email address of the general counsel because a friend worked there. and told me about the job opening. And so I just emailed him and said, "Hi, I think I'd be perfect for this role." And at the time, technology was a very small part of that function because there
Hmm.
wasn't really any legal specific tech that you could deploy.
Sure.
And so it was really about, rolling out enterprise types of tools, which of course look totally different today than they did then. And a lot of desktop support, helping the lawyers, just kind of
Hmm.
manage everything. But it had a strong finance component, so they were really trying to get their arms around outside counsel spend and budget management. So my background was a good fit at that time, and so I was really, really lucky to get the role at HP when I did.
That's awesome. When you moved into legal ops, what was the profession like at the time? Or did you feel like you had many peers? I mean, I feel like not only were you stepping into this role that you didn't know that much about, did HP really know what they were hiring for either? Like, that's one of the things that I'm curious about.
Yeah, and it's funny because they was called Legal Operations. I think it
Okay.
was the first formal organization, certainly on the West Coast, calling it that. And it, but I think they knew what they wanted. They wanted somebody to make their lives easier and kind of be invisible behind the scenes doing that. Honestly, that's it. That's it. the, they were extremely grateful to have me there. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was, and it was really, truly. I look back on that time as just with nothing but gratitude because I learned everything. Just not everything I know today, of course, but so much. It gave me so much of the basis of my being able to go out and consult and build my own company. Right, it was
Uh-huh.
all because of HP. So I think they look, at that time, I think they knew what they wanted, and that's what they got. Somebody who could crunch numbers, make
Hmm.
sense of a budget, build spreadsheets, help them organize what they thought they were going to be spending in the upcoming year, help them kind of manage outside counsel, and get them the very fundamentals of technology,
Hmm.
implemented. But the incarnation of what, the legal operations manager then was compared to what it is now is just wildly different, right? And
Hmm.
so it's kind of funny because I feel like the career path of a legal operations manager almost followed like my career and maturity throughout the career. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
it started very basic, like just help me get my password reset for my whatever login, right? And help me do the budget all the way to like building a strategy. When I got that role as chief of staff and got the promotion to that role and had no idea what I was doing, that's the
Hmm.
genesis of CLOC, which I know we'll get to in a second. But through my kind of growing in that role and learning how to do new things and becoming more strategic in that role, the expectations of that role also kind of matured and people started to look at it as a more strategic role, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, clearly, I mean, you rose to become chief of staff to the GC or the CLO there at HP. I think a lot of people who are in legal ops roles view that as, maybe the pinnacle, right? If not going off and like you have starting your own consultancy or like, our COO has going off and running a sort of much broader operations function. People view that as the pinnacle. Tell us a little bit more about that journey and how you were able to get to become and build the trust with the GC to be able to take on a position like that that's so strategic.
A couple of things. I would say that every single legal leader that I worked with at HP helped me tremendously. And so
Hmm.
I had great mentorship, and I think mentorship is such a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And so people who I'm still very close with today and stay in touch with today really helped me figure out what I was doing and what I should do next. HP was great. The CLO that I worked with at the time, later in my career at HP, paid for an executive, kind of coach to work with me, and
Oh
so I
wow,
thought, yeah, I
that's
thought
awesome.
that was it was awesome. It really, we so often we promote people to these roles and we expect them to know what to do without any kind of formal
Hmm.
training or guidance. And in my opinion, you're setting them up to fail, right?
Hmm.
Because they might be great at doing the job they're doing, but then when they get to the next level, they have to kind of figure it out on their own.
Hmm.
And so that's what I think, the executive coaching was critical. I'm so grateful that HP invested in me, and it's not cheap, right? So that they
Hmm.
thought that that was a good use of their money, and it certainly helped me. But then the networking too, Tyler, like that's, what really, it was that promotion to chief of staff that brought me to start the CLOC organization, or reach out to the other folks, and it eventually, morphed into the formal CLOC organization. But just figuring out, I realized at some point, like, I am the only one. I had a small networking group within HP that was for chiefs of staff, because the other execs had chiefs of staff, but they were doing very different things than I was doing. Some similarities, and it certainly helped to talk to them and
Uh-huh.
hear what's going on in the exec community and all of that. Like that was good. But there was nobody in my entire organization of, I think it was like 300,000 people at that time, with ET, contractors and full-time employees. And there was nobody else who was doing what I was doing exactly. And so you really had to look outward. And that's been a theme of my entire career too, Tyler. Like,
Hmm.
you can't be so heads down that you're only working on the stuff that hits your plate. That is
Hmm.
how you get kind of pigeonholed into this, non-strategic role. And that's what the people will think of you as, just a doer. We are doers, and that's
Sure.
important. It's important to get stuff done. But looking outward and figuring out what's next, what should I be focusing on, is so critical. And I think, mentorship and the coaching was so pivotal, but networking is really critical, and benchmarking, along with the networking.
Let's talk a little bit more about Clock, this organization that you helped start. How did it get started? Like, what were those early days like? Was it a formal group, or was it more, hey, I went and got coffee. Do you guys want to come by and hang out in this conference room and chat about our problems? What was it like? How did it get going?
It's yeah, it's funny. It started with me picking up the phone and reaching out to other organizations, and or whatever, emailing their GCs and saying, "Hey, this is who I am, and what I do, and who I work for, most importantly," because they needed to see that other GC's name in order to even look at my email. "Do you have a similar role in your department? And if so, can you make an introduction? I'd like to start a networking group." And 9 times out of 10, they were like, "Yes, I do, and here you go." And that's how I met quite a few of the people, who were the original founders of Clock. And then through a consultant that we worked with, she also said that, introduced me to Connie Brenton, who was also trying to do exactly the same thing I was doing. And so we, made that connection and hit it off. And we decided we would do these phone calls, every month. They were like monthly phone calls where we would get together, do an hour-long phone call, and just check in with each other. What are the big things that you guys are focusing on, et cetera. And what we found was it wasn't enough. And so then we said, you know what if we actually meet in person, do it every other month, but meet in person for like half the day, and like just
Oh,
work through
huh.
some of these issues. And so, much like operations managers do, is a lot of like workshopping, and, well, what do let's like, kind of whiteboard this stuff out.
Uh-huh.
And we ended up having our very first meeting at HP, back in my offices way back when. And that kind of set the standard for every one of us would host a meeting every other month,
Hmm.
and do it that way. And then we had phone calls, in between. But it started out like pretty formal, as ops managers do. We like structure around things. And then, of course, and we decided to do the conference in 2016, and then it really became formalized.
Do you think that anybody in the early days had an idea about how big it would become, or maybe not just Clock as an organization, but the sort of broader legal operations profession, and how many folks would have those sorts of roles, and the vendors, and like how big this whole sort of industry would become? Was that
Not in
surprising?
the Yeah, very surprising. I think not in the beginning. I don't think any of us knew. Literally, I was doing it for selfish reasons. Like, I want to be good at my role. These people can help me. They're smarter than me in so many ways. They know a lot more than I do. And so it was really about learning from each other, and it
Mhm.
was not about even elevating the role, to be honest with you, that wasn't even top of mind for me. It was more about really figuring out how we could do our jobs better.
Yeah.
Then, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Because I think at some point you like really think about, you know, you start to anybody in any career, I think at some point starts to think about what's next. And so that it became pretty evident that, there are things we could be doing to like give ourselves more visibility, especially around getting a seat at the table, because I think that, we cannot be effective in our jobs unless people
Hmm.
take us seriously and give us that seat at the table. So for me, it really got to be more around like, how do I get that seat at the table? How do I get more visibility internally, et cetera? And then it was, oh, hey, there's new people starting in this role. More of us are popping up. We can actually help them and guide them and let them skip a bunch of the, painful steps that we had to go through in the beginning. And I think that's really where it started. I don't think any of us saw what it could be today. But Connie definitely had a vision once we really started to grow the organization and more people
Hmm.
started participating, that it could be bigger than what it was. And then it became pretty evident pretty quickly that this was a thing, and there was something behind it.
I've got a few questions for you about sort of the legal ops role and the talent side of this. And I guess the first one is, we're similar in a sense, although I'm not a legal ops person, but I've worked for different GCs and on a lot of legal teams and with a lot of lawyers. Neither of us has a law degree. I think that people recognize, especially in the legal ops field, that having different backgrounds or different perspectives can lead to better contributions or a team that runs better. Or so, broad question for you, I think, is like, do you think even today that you need a JD to break into legal ops?
No, I think I know quite a few people who have gone, the MBA route, and
Uh-huh.
who have also gotten, who have law degrees. I know a lot of GCs who went back and got MBAs, for instance. Um, and they will tell you every single time I've asked them, because I'm always curious, right? That the training is totally different. And so in my mind, it doesn't hurt by any means to have a law degree and to have
Sure.
practiced as a lawyer. In fact, it definitely gives you some different insights. And like you're saying, all of us come from different backgrounds. It gives us strengths in some areas, weaknesses in others. And I think, coming from as a practicing lawyer, you can definitely add a spin on it that I wouldn't have been able to add because I don't have those same experiences.
Hmm.
However, at some point when you're running the business of law, and when you're running the operations, which is really the business management of the legal department, you don't need that law degree, and you're not practicing law unless you have a hybrid role. And you think of it like the COO of any organization, right? What is the
Hmm.
best way to get something done? Lawyers aren't not taught that in law school. In
Hmm.
fact, there's no emphasis or training on efficiency. Nobody cares because you get paid by the hour, at least until hopefully someday I help to put an end to that. But so efficiency doesn't even come into play, but when you go to business school, it's all about efficiency, right? And the best
Hmm.
ways of doing things, and learning about kaizens and kanbans, and the best operational practices and all of that. So I think having business training is far more meaningful, but then you do have a gap in how the law departments operate, so you do have to learn
Yes.
that. And so you're going to have a gap unless you have both degrees and have operated in both environments. And so you've got to learn one or the other. But I think that insisting that somebody who's doing this role has a law degree, you're really missing out on so many candidates that are
Hmm.
completely qualified for this role and would, knock it out of the park. And when you think of, a CEO, a COO, the other executive roles that run an organization, they don't have law degrees typically, and it's just a very different practice. It's a different discipline.
Building on this, so we being SpotDraft, recently released a state of legal ops report. There were a few hundred responses, a couple hundred responses, something like that. So it's a decent sample size across organizations. One of the stats that I thought it was interesting is that 60% of the folks who responded said they found it very difficult to find the right talent. And I mean, that could be maybe because they're not looking in the right places. I'm just curious, given your experience across these different organizations and now also advising a variety of sort of legal teams and departments on how to build legal ops functions and how to hire. Do you have any tips on hiring or any tips to make that process of finding the right talent easier?
Yeah, I think, look, like attracts like, right? So
Mm,
no matter what, you made a comment about diversity earlier. And no matter what, it's hard for us to step out of our comfort zone. We like to hire people who are like us. That
sure.
is a human, right? That's just it's our instinct. I think is just kind of how we are as humans. We like to surround people or surround ourselves with people who are similar to us, and regardless of what that's like. It doesn't. I'm not talking about any specific, gender, race,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm talking about just people who behave like us, have similar backgrounds to us. It's when we're in that work role, I think that's an instinct that humans have. And so
Hmm.
lawyers like to hire other lawyers. It's just, I've witnessed this for the last 20 plus years, right? This is what they do. So I think you made a comment about diversity brings better results. You were kind of alluding to that
Yeah.
earlier, which is true. That's now evident. I always knew that in my gut to be true. If you have people from different backgrounds, et cetera, they are going to, give you different answers, and I think those differences will ultimately result in a better outcome.
Hmm.
But I think it's not necessarily our instinct to look outside of the common places where we look for talent. And
Yeah.
so I think it takes that extra step of like stepping outside of your comfort zone. Don't just go to, the typical places where you look to hire people for this role, but you can go to, you can first of all talk to your other executives within your
Yeah.
organization, right? And see if there is a killer operations person who's looking for a stretch role or something different. These people in operations can come from HR, from IT, from
Hmm.
finance, from I've seen them come from every part of the organization, especially if they've done like that chief of staff kind of role. I
Hmm.
think they can be a really good fit. And then also, then again, going back to the networking organizations, I think there's a wealth of talent within these networking organizations. So orgs like Link, I should only be promoting Link, but there are other but of course we know there are other orgs out there. But really trying to I spend a lot of time actually posting on LinkedIn, right? Because a
Uh-huh.
GC I know will say, hey, I'm hiring, and I'll post that rec. So going to places like LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn is pivotal if you're looking for you have to have a robust profile if you're looking to make a career change. But I think that asking business people where you can find a good business minded
Hmm.
person to come in and run the business of law in your organization is really a great place to start. So, I don't think that your law firms are really going to have the answer.
Hmm.
Some of your tech vendors,
Yeah.
also have, right? They have great networks and they know this space really well. So talking to people outside of those who practice substantive law, I think is a good idea. So like the tech vendors, service
Hmm.
providers like me, there's all kinds of recruiters out there, of course, who work in this space and who really,
Sure.
kind of really dig into the community.
I think this sort of question also about, hey, how can legal ops and GCs work better together is interesting. Given that they may come, maybe the GC comes from a somewhat significantly different background than the person who they've hired to lead legal ops. Maybe the legal ops leader is very savvy technically, right, and very good at process, and maybe the GC is extremely good externally and very good at strategic questions, but doesn't really like to be like in the weeds doing things all the time, right? Or building programs. Um, how do you think that these two groups, generally speaking, can learn to work better together? Where do you think that starts?
Yeah, and let me start with back to your other question about hiring, GCs
Yeah.
looking to hire in this role. I think you have to look for somebody who complements your skill set. And
Mhm.
this kind of answers both questions, but I think it's, we work with GCs who are very tech savvy all the way to complete, neophytes. They want nothing to do with it, right? And we work with GCs who are gregarious and outgoing and just
Mhm.
natural kind of communicators, all the way to those who are like definitely more heads down, and they'll
Mhm.
come up with a strategy, but they don't want to be the one communicating or implementing that strategy, more introverted. So I always counsel them to hire somebody who is different than you, who's going to complement, but who you still have chemistry with, because that's very, very important, very important.
Sure.
But who's going to complement those skills. And so, if as a leader, you need to be building a strategy. You need to be communicating that strategy constantly. It's not a one and done, to get
Mhm.
that into the DNA, right? The culture of the environment. We always say that you're going to end up with a culture in your environment, but if you don't do it deliberately, it's probably going to be the culture you don't want.
Mhm.
Every organization has a culture, but you have to really focus on being very, deliberate in what kind of a culture you want. And so if you want people who are, we see these environments where people are kind of like keeping things very close to the vest and they don't want to share. And they're, just that tends to be an environment that is not very trustworthy. And it's
Mhm.
simply because the GC isn't communicating well enough. And again, if that is not your jam, if you are not a great communicator, I'm not
Uh-huh.
asking you to go do, a bunch of communications courses and learn how to do it, but hire somebody who can do it for you, and like who you could
Mhm.
say, look, this is what I expect from people. This is what I want. This is the direction I want the department to go in, and they're going to help you build that out. So I think it's really critical to look for those skills that, first of all, be introspective enough to know what skills you lack,
Yeah.
right, and know where you could use some support, and then build a team around you who can fill those gaps that you have. Every one of us have those gaps. And so I'm sorry, Tyler, what was your original question? I was
Well,
gonna tie it back.
yeah. No, that's perfect, because the question was really also about, okay, you find that person, right, who maybe complements you. Um, how can legal ops and the GC work better together and actually sort of like get things done better together? Where does that come from?
Okay, God, thank you. Yes, that's how I was.
Yeah.
I knew I had to point to all of this. So, tying back to your original question about, okay, what does that mean then for GCs and legal ops professionals? Look, I know a lot of GCs who think of legal ops as very traditional. Just get me a budget, pick a technology. I
Hmm.
still want you to, going back to my old HP days, be behind the scenes and get it done. And fine, that'll work to some degree, and you will definitely get stuff done. But if you really are looking to become, a leader in this field, and be a world class legal department, a world class organization, then you have to take it to the next level. And so what that is going to look like is then you bringing somebody on board who is, not everybody's going to get a chief of staff. I recognize that. And we talk to
Yeah.
GCs all the time who say, look, my CEO doesn't even have a chief of staff, so I'm not going to get one either. But having somebody in mind with that same skill set who's going to help you operationalize your vision. I mean, that's really at the end of the day what you're trying to get done. And so if you, as a GC, you have to have a vision. Don't just be heads down and we're going to protect the company from 100% risk, and
Hmm.
and just hit everything that comes to the legal department. We're just going to solve and churn and churn and churn and churn, because you will be on a hamster wheel forever. Instead, take a step back and look at, what should the legal department even be doing in the first place? Does this even meet the threshold of coming to legal, or can it
Hmm.
be, a template, a training, put it out to client enablement, or just a business risk? Like this, you're going to do this yourselves, and we're willing to take that risk. And so, really getting your arms around that, and a good chief of staff can help you figure that out. And then also operationalization.
Yeah.
That'll work.
Right. It is. I
Um,
think that's a word.
yeah, okay. Well, if not, we're making it one. But like really looking at, okay, now what is your overarching vision, and how do we get that done in the best way possible, and in a palatable way for your team too, right? Like you can't
Mhm.
just, you need somebody to influence them and move people along, both internal clients and your internal team. So I think it's getting that right person to help you do just that, and you'll be successful.
So we've talked about sort of your journey through HP. we haven't talked as much about the other companies you worked with as chief of staff and as head of legal ops, but helping start CLOC. I'm curious what led you to want to start Link, and sort of what gap did you feel like needed to be filled, and why did you want to build another community?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I was, very active in clock, obviously. And
Hmm.
when I started UpLevel, was my GC announced that he was going to be retiring, and so I twisted his arm to stay working a few more years. And I said, let's consult. Like, I think I'm getting calls every day, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, what do you do for this? What do you do for that? I think there's a business there where we can help more than just one or two legal departments at a time. So when we started UpLevel, I could not participate in Clock any longer because I
Ah.
was on the seller side, right? And beyond that, what I'd heard from the old timers like me
Hmm.
was Clock has gotten so big. It's really hard to have content for everybody. To be all things to all people is really tough. I don't even
Totally.
know that I could, like, nobody can really do that successfully. And so the people who are very experienced in this space, what I found was they were kind of looking for a space where they could, have us go back to that really smaller, more
Hmm.
intimate environment. When you're in a room of 30 people, you're a lot more willing to share what's honestly going on in your department
Yes.
versus 1,000 people, right? Like, you're not going to be sharing things like that in a giant room. It's just the nature of how we communicate with each other.
Uh-huh.
And so Andrew Dick, who's my partner at Link, who's now part of the L Suite too, I forget exactly how we met. He has an origin story for us, but I he we did we talked early on when he was building in-house focus, and then we reconnected to record something, a training, I think, right, where I was in that training, and we hit it off. And then later he called me, and the pandemic had just hit, and he's like,
Ah.
why don't we do a bunch of things virtually,
Uh-huh.
and so we ended up starting Link that way. And so we were just doing these events every other month, and it was really meant just for smaller kind of group, more senior people within the space. And that was kind of
Hmm.
the criteria to join Link too. Like, you had to be managing a department or be a direct report of somebody managing the department, because they're the next up and
Sure.
comers, right? And so we had a little bit more of a criteria that where you had to be senior to join. And then we started doing these events. And then, of course, when the pandemic was over, we started doing in person events, and the organization grew and grew. But the idea was, to keep it like to a more manageable kind of group where we could break
Hmm.
out and do like these working sessions. And it seemed to be successful.
Uh, Tell me a little bit about like what you feel like you've accomplished over the past almost 5 years, I guess, with Link. And then why did you think sort of the L suite was the right partner to continue to build the org and take it forward? I know those folks very well, so it's obvious to me, but for the benefit of our listeners.
Well, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it too after I give my
Yeah.
answer, if that's okay. But um, it was, this is a space where you innovate or die, right? Like,
Hmm.
there was only Andrew and I are running our own separate companies and doing this as a side gig, right? And
Yeah.
so we didn't have a team of people to help us with these events. It's literally like us scouting locations and
Hmm.
picking the menus and everything else, right? So it's a lot of work for two people to do part-time, and I had my team helping me. Of course, the UpLevel team always chipped in and helped with everything, but it was a lot of work. And I we both had this conversation earlier in last summer, and we said, like, we need to do something different. Like, you have to keep
Hmm.
building. What is it exactly that we want to be doing? And Andrew had the connection with Tech GC.
Yeah.
Um, and so he started the conversations, and it was just one of those, like, stars aligning, really, where they were looking to build out an ops community. Their GCs had been asking them for an ops community.
Yeah.
So they were looking at building it out, and they could either do that from scratch or acquire Link, which was
Hmm.
already built and running and functional. And so they went that route. And now the idea is to have, the benefit to us. I mean, it's tremendous, right? Like
Hmm.
we die if we don't have the attention of GCs. There are other models out there that talk about different routes that people can go in our careers, and
Hmm.
certainly that is 100% true. We could legit leave the legal team, move to an operating a COO role somewhere else. You've seen
Sure.
it done. You have that at
Yeah.
SpotDraft, right? But at least within our organizations, if that is not your desire, and it might not be the desire of everybody to do that, but there's still so much room for us to grow within our legal organizations, right? And in order to do that, we have to have the ear of the GCs. And so Andrew and I were both trying to figure out ways where we could lean in more heavily to that GC community.
Hmm.
And so when he said, how about us looking at the L suite and talking to them, I was like, I did not have 1 second of hesitation. It was like a no brainer where we could have these crossover events and we can be
Yes.
in front of the GC community. And it's important, so for us, like from legal ops professional side, it's really important for us to be in front of the GCs. Like
Hmm.
our jobs don't exist without them. However, they have so much to learn too. And so,
Yes.
especially as I talk to Greg and Kieran and hear like how what the percentage of them that still don't have these roles in place, right? And the
Hmm.
work is happening. Don't Budgeting is happening, cutting expenses is happening, implementing
Yes.
CLMs, all of that is happening, implementing a GAI program, that's happening. But then if you don't have an ops person doing it, you've got a team of lawyers doing it 5% of their time or whatever, who aren't
Hmm.
trained to do it, who aren't really into it. So it's important for them to hear from us too. So to me, it was just a no brainer.
Yeah, I mean, so beyond the sort of, I think Link and TechGC, the L Suite, have pretty strong philosophical and brand alignment. Think about the way that you've hosted events before, how you try to keep them smaller, more intimate, places where there can be real conversation. I continue to be a big fan of CLOC, and we like going to CLOC, but it's a
Yeah,
totally different experience from going to something like a small 15-person roundtable that's a very curated group of maybe people who have been in roles at the executive level for 10, 15 plus years, right? I mean, it's just a different sort of conversation.
absolutely. Yep.
But I'm super excited to finally have a place where we can show up and maybe have GCs in the room and head of legal ops or chief of staff to CLO in the room and get them in conversation with each other. Because I'm also just really excited to. I don't know how that conversation is going to go. I haven't seen it done that many times before, and I'm excited to learn. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see. I'm excited to see sort of like what questions they ask each other or what they say they're learning from each other. Yeah.
Yeah, me too, because the crossover events that I've hosted, which is not really a crossover event, it's like really having a couple of GCs on a link panel, you know what I mean, where the
Hmm.
audience can ask questions, but the audience is all legal ops people. And so what's kind of funny is when you think about it, it's all the GCs. The only people I would ever invite to those are GCs who take this very seriously and have strong
Hmm.
ops, backgrounds. And most of them have the MBAs on top of their law degrees and all of that, right? So you're right. This is like we're entering a new space now where it's a GCs who just don't know this space very well. And
Hmm.
they're asking for information on it, which is great. So they're at least curious about it, but I'm very curious to see how these events go too. And so often you'll see events where there's both legal ops professionals, GCs, CLOs, but the
Hmm.
tracks are totally different, right? And so maybe they come together for like one thing or something, and one plenary session or something, and then the meals or whatever. But I think having the like digging down and dirty, like workshopping stuff, really getting into the weeds on stuff. One of the things I know that Karen asked me to do is like a training on building custom GPTs for GCs, like how to
Yeah.
build writing assistants and stuff like that, like really getting into the practicalities. We could all talk about strategy all day. It's important, it's critical. But when it comes down to it, like we're nothing without actually doing stuff, right? So you've got to
Hmm.
have the strategy for sure, but like I really do feel like we want to roll up our sleeves and do things together, and so I think that's where this is a space where we can do that.
What will your role be with Link slash the L Suite? And how are you thinking about that? And also your consultancy. Is this maybe going to give you a little more time almost to put your foot on the gas with UpLevel Ops? Or yeah, how are you thinking about that mix?
Well, so far, no, they're using me quite which no, I'm very happy about because the focus for my work now with the L suite is the stuff that I wanted to be doing, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it's the content, it's, looking at, building this community more. It's what do the events look like
Hmm.
versus doing the administration, which it's the same thing that I consult with my clients about, right? Like you want to get the right resources doing the right things. And
Yes.
it probably wasn't the best use of Andrew and my time picking menu items for each event and stuff, right? Or sending out all the reminders and, doing all of that. That stuff is critical. It has to get done. If it doesn't get done, these things
Hmm.
don't happen. But maybe not the best use of our time doing it. And so with the L Suites power of like having a whole team of people who do nothing but this, right? This is what
Yes.
they do. They're so good at it. So now I get to leverage this team and then I get to focus on, engagement with the community,
Hmm.
and really building the strategy and the content. So I'm still heavily involved, obviously, and will be for the future. But it's going to be, I think, more interesting work that I wanted to focus on to begin with. And I think ultimately it only helps my consulting work, right?
Uh-huh.
Because it educates us. We get to see what's going on out there in that space. Of course, the networking and meeting people is always really, really critical. And so I think it will ultimately be a super benefit to UpLevel. But, selfishly, I get to do the work that I really enjoy doing.
That's great. If folks want to either get connected to you or they're hearing about this and they're thinking, I'd like to attend a Link L Suite conference, where should they go? How can they get connected?
They can go to Link for Legal, LINK, Link for Legal at .com. Go to the website to join. They can reach out to me directly at Steph at uplevelops.com. That's STEPH at uplevelops.com. Shoot me a message and we'll get it connected. Um, and yeah, I think those are probably the two best ways to
That's
to
great.
learn about Link.
That's easy. That's not like some fill
Easy.
out a bunch of forms and
Yeah, no.
Uh,
Not at all.
I've got I think they're fun. Some fun closing questions for you as we start to wrap up, if you're up for it.
I'm up for
Uh,
it.
the first one is, what's your favorite part of your day to day?
Um, okay, the favorite part. Well, I have an answer I should give, but an answer that's true. Which one did you want?
Give them both. Let's hear them both.
Okay. The the answer that is also true, but I would say if I'm being completely honest with myself, it's the second favorite part of my day is after all my meetings are done, and I try to
Uh-huh.
end my meetings around like 3 or 4 o'clock Pacific, so I have a couple of times to like reflect and actually get work done.
Uh-huh.
Um, when it's a good day and I've had good meetings and I feel like I've helped people,
Uh-huh.
that to me, like, sets me up for, like, a whole afternoon and evening of just, like, happiness, right? If I feel like my clients are happy or I've made some new connections and have helped them in some way, I genuinely feel happy. So that's the
Yeah.
favorite part of my day when, like, my meetings are over and I can kinda reflect on the work that I did that day and hopefully how I helped people. But the secret kind of really thing that I really love every day is I'm a big workout fanatic, and
Okay.
I love my workouts. So when I get to, close my computer for
Hmm.
an hour and do a killer workout, then that's really like that gives me energy. That kind of feeds me for the whole day.
Do you follow some sort of video series, or do you do like hit workouts or weights, or what do you like to do?
Everything, but I have personal training that I do once a
Cool.
week, and I do Orange Theory usually once a week, and then I
Uh-huh.
do have a Peloton, and we'll do those workouts. But my favorite workout is MMA and boxing.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so Redwood City has a gym called the
Uh-huh.
Undisputed, and it's just killer. It's such a great workout. It's the best workout I've ever done in my life.
So don't run into Steph in a dark alley and try to take her watch.
You can try, but we'll see what happens.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a professional pet peeve?
Oh, a professional pet peeve. Oh my gosh. I would say, wait, because there's so many, Tyler. Like, I would really, um, yeah. Okay. My professional pet peeve, and this has been a long running one with me, is the "it's not my job" attitude.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I have always worked with but you cannot do everything.
Yeah.
And so there's really this balance of, being able to understand. I would always tell my team when something comes to you, it is your responsibility, whether it's your responsibility or not,
Hmm.
even if it's to get it to the right person who can help them, right? Like we are in a customer service industry. When you're in legal
Hmm.
operations, you are a support function. And
Hmm.
so really helping people all the way through, I think that excellent customer service attitude has helped me my whole career with everything I've done. I think it's why people like me and why I've gotten hired for roles because I really genuinely want to help people. And I think that having that attitude is really helpful. And I think when I see people who don't have that attitude, it frustrates me. I would also say another frustration is like that expectation of doing more with less, and that is always put on people
Hmm.
is incredibly demotivating. I think it's the most demotivating thing you could say to somebody. Do more. I'm going to give you less, but I would expect you to do more. I can't think of anything that's more demotivating, and so I try to work with teams on, like, no, do less with less. Like, let's figure out what you can say no to, stop doing
Hmm.
altogether, or automating, or outsourcing, or something like that, and so that's a big focus of the work that we do.
I'm sure there's a lot of that work because I'm sure that legal ops leaders hear that all the time. And the
All the
GC may not
time.
even want to be delivering them that message. That
No.
message may just be coming from the budget or the CFO or the financial environment or the lack of ability to raise another round or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah. I've never heard a GC say that gleefully, like, it's never coming from them.
um, Is there a book that you would recommend for our listeners to read? And this could be a, practical professional book, or it could just be something fun that you've read recently that you want to share with the audience.
Oh my god, yes. Well, okay, so a huge reader. I get through about 150 books a year.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Are
I
you a
listen to
speed
books
reader?
all I'm no, no, I'm a speed listener. I do Audible. So when I
Okay.
say reading, my husband's always like, "Oh, did you read," air quotes, "did you read another book?" I'm like, "It doesn't matter. Science shows that it doesn't matter if you listen or read, you're still getting the same out of
That's
it."
still impressive.
And
150. Wow. Yeah.
I do. I like plow through them. Like I'm Audible's biggest customer. But I love fiction, which is terrible because I know I'm supposed to be really, I'm supposed to be
No.
sounding a lot smarter than that. But I would say, okay, these are the books that I've read recently that I loved. I loved Kara Swisher's Burn book. I
Okay.
thought it was awesome. And anybody who lives in Silicon Valley, she's if you know who Kara Swisher is, she's like
Hmm.
the Silicon
Hmm.
Valley, famous tech reporter. And I think she's amazing. I love everything she does. And she narrates her own book, which I also love.
Uh-huh.
And it's really great. She talks about all the tech giants and her relationship with them, and she has deep relationships with them. And so, and it's called Burn Book because it's based on Mean Girls, and they have the burn book of all the girls that they're just
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
like
that's
trash
right.
and stuff. And so that she calls it her burn book, and I think it's excellent. It's a really, really fantastic book. And then the other one is called The Coming Wave by Mustafa
I read that
Suleiman,
one.
who,
That's a good one. Yeah.
okay, it's
Yeah. But
really good.
tell, yeah, our listeners a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, he came from the DeepMind, like that original one of the early AI
Hmm.
companies. And then the book was about like what are there are risks with AI. I'm a
Hmm.
huge fan of AI. Like we've leaned super heavy into it. I know you guys are too. Obviously, it's like it is revolutionary. It's going to change the way we work. It's already changing the way that we work,
Hmm.
but there are risks, and bad actors can do very bad things with it.
Yes.
And so I his whole take on it is, and Kara Swisher talks a lot about this in her book too. We need to get our arms around this and have some, and our government is so they don't even know how to, operate their iPhones, much less really understand. You see it in the congressional testimony. Like it's, they don't even know what questions to ask. They're asking, the Apple CEO about stuff that they should be asking Facebook about. Like they don't even know the different tech companies, et cetera. So like we cannot rely on our government to do this, and so there's got to be some policing within these organizations have to do something. And so I think it's a little bit of an eye opener, almost a little scary if
Hmm.
his book, but also if you take it with the with hopefully with the intent that he meant. I think it shows that there's hope, that like we
Hmm.
can still get our arms around this, and we can really make sure that it's not used for ill intent. But it's very eye opening, and really the power of, like, we're talking about AIs for like writing assistants and figuring out how to analyze invoices
Yes.
and contracts and all of that. But they're talking about like biochemical engineering and weaponizing this stuff. And it's just way beyond, anything that we operate in on a day-to-day basis. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. That's a good one. I like both those. Okay. A final question for you, sort of traditional closing question for my guests. It's if you could look back on your days just getting started as a legal ops professional, maybe that first role at HP, what is one thing that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then?
Um, oh, okay. One thing that I know now that I wish I knew then, I think that I had more power than I gave myself credit for.
Hmm.
And so I did take first of all, I was very young when I started this role. I was a kid. I was really young, like 24 years old. You know what I mean? And so and it's intimidating working with all of these really seasoned lawyers and these big tech companies, and you feel like the freshman on campus. And so I think that it's I think that really looking back and understanding and doing it with a gentle hand too. Like I think you cannot shove things down people's throats. You can't make them work in a different way by telling them that they have to do it. I think it's really using influence, which I think I was good at, but knowing that I had more influence than I thought I had. I think I was pretty, kind of timid and took a backseat earlier on in my career.
Hmm.
And probably, I don't know, maybe the people who worked with me would disagree with that, but that's kind of how I see myself. And then knowing that I could have driven a little bit harder and gotten like a more senior role, advocated for myself. I think for
Hmm.
those raises, for those promotions. I think I could have done that probably better, stronger earlier on.
I think that's a great point. I don't usually actually comment on these. Usually, I just close. But what I really like about that is I think that people, especially early in their careers, forget that maybe their bosses are looking to them or want their advice or view them as being really good at their jobs. They're kind of thinking like, how do I please the execs? How do I make them happy? They're going to be skeptical of me day in, day out. And I think that's probably not the case, right? Like, I think you
Yeah.
might have more power because your boss has hired you for a job and thinks you can do it and respects you and wants to see you succeed and wants to see you surprise them.
Yeah, and you know more things than they know in this
Yeah.
area, like in this
Uh-huh.
instance, you really do know a lot more than they know. So, knowing kind of your understanding, what you can bring to the table, I think is so important.
Well, Steph, this has been a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you at some Link events this year.
Me
Hopefully, seeing some
too.
of the listeners there as well. And so, thanks so much for joining me today for this conversation.
Okay, and I have a correction to make. I do not read 150 books a year. It's about 75 books.
Well, that's still a lot.
Yeah, because I'm looking how long because I have
I mean,
almost 400
that's
titles,
still
and
more
I've
than a
been.
book and a half a week. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah, okay,
lot.
so that's still yeah. But lest you think I'm like, that's all I do, I don't work.
I would respect it. And I would ask you after this call how.
Yeah, listening, right? You could do it whenever, cooking, getting ready, walking the dogs, and so if I had to sit and read these books, I'd never get them done, but
Very impressive nonetheless. Thanks so much, Steph.
thanks, Tyler, thank you for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Abstract, and we hope to see you next time.